golf to make. And yet here's a man who had both of those things working in his favor and still walked away with nothing. Not the trophy, not the moment that would have changed his life forever. The very cushion that was supposed to protect him became the stage for the most painful collapse in golf history. How does having everything in your favor turn into losing everything at once? That contradiction is exactly where this story begins. Jean van de Velde was born in the south of France. His family had no deep roots in golf, no clubhouse legacy, no father who had won trophies before him. Golf simply found him at the age of 6.5. What made this unusual was the setting itself. During family holidays, most children his age spent their days at the beach. Jean van de Velde chose something else entirely. He picked up a set of clubs instead. In a country where golf was still a niche pursuit, fewer than 300,000 people played the sport across all of France at the time. A child choosing fairways over sand and surf was already an anomaly. He was good early, and he stayed good. He won the French Youth Championship, then the French Amateur Championship in 1986. That same year, after finishing school, he began his military service, joining a special program that allowed elite athletes to train full-time. For Jean van de Velde, it meant a full year of golf at an intensity he had never experienced before. He turned professional in 1987 and joined the European Tour in 1989. But the following decade did not read like the resume of a future icon. In over a decade as a professional, he won exactly one tournament, the Roma Masters, in 1993. By the summer of 1999, Jean van de Velde was ranked 152nd in the world. Not a rising star, not a name casual golf fans would recognize. Just another player trying to make a living on tour. Nobody, not the golf writers, not the broadcasters, not even Jean van de Velde himself, could have predicted that within a single week, this quiet, largely unknown Frenchman would become the most talked about golfer on the planet. The location was Carnoustie, Scotland, a course so unforgiving that players nicknamed it Carnoustie. Thick, rough, punishing wind off the North Sea, and a layout that seemed designed to humble anyone who underestimated it. The proof of that difficulty came from an unlikely source. Sergio Garcia, just 19 years old and fresh off his first professional win at the Irish Open, walked off the course in tears after shooting 89 and then 83 in the opening 2 rounds. He collapsed into his mother's arms, overwhelmed by a golf course that refused to be tamed. Jean van de Velde had the opposite experience. While the rest of the field struggled, he found rhythm. He led after the second round, then again after the third. Following a round of 68, he spoke with quiet awareness of what a victory would mean, saying, "I think it would be an enormous boost. I think there would be a lot of interest. If I can do something really good, if I win, you never know what will happen. It can be a tremendous boost for me, but definitely for golf in France." By the time the final round arrived, van de Velde held a 5-shot lead over Justin Leonard and Craig Parry, the largest 54-hole lead in the history of the Open Championship at that point. A golfer few outside France had heard of before that week was now standing on the edge of one of golf's most historic achievements. All that remained was one final round, one final test of nerve, on a course that had already broken far more experienced players that week. The final round did not go as smoothly as a 5-shot lead might suggest. Van de Velde bogeyed the 11th hole, then the 12th, and suddenly Craig Parry had pulled level with him. The cushion that once felt untouchable was gone. He answered back with a birdie at the 14th, restoring some breathing room. A bogey at the 15th followed, then 2 steady pars at the 16th and 17th. By the time he reached the 18th tee, van de Velde still held a 3-shot lead over both Paul Lawrie and Justin Leonard. The 18th at Carnoustie was no ordinary closing hole. A par 4 stretching nearly 500 yards, with the Barry Burn winding along the right side of the fairway, waiting for any shot that strayed too far. It was a hole that punished ambition and rewarded caution. But caution was hardly required. All Van de Velde needed was a double bogey, 6 shots, to become the first Frenchman to win the Open Championship since Arnaud Massy in 1907. Nearly 100 years of history were sitting on the other side of one manageable score. He had already proven he could handle this very hole. In 2 of his previous 3 rounds that week, he had made birdie there. The math was simple. The path was clear. A safe shot down the fairway, a conservative approach, and 2 comfortable strokes to finish on the green if needed, and the trophy would belong to him. Standing on that tee, Jean Van de Velde had more room for error than almost any golfer in major championship history has ever had, walking up 18 with a title on the line. What happened next would make sure nobody ever forgot it. Standing on the 18th tee, Jean Van de Velde reached for his driver. Not an iron, not the safe conservative choice that would have all but guaranteed the trophy. The driver. On the broadcast, longtime commentator Peter Allis voiced what many were already thinking, saying simply, "I'm not sure this is right." His tee shot sailed to the right, carrying so far offline that it barely avoided the burn altogether, coming to rest on the 17th fairway instead. He had been fortunate. The lead was still his to protect. Rather than laying up short and safe, Van de Velde reached for a 2-iron, attempting to reach the green in 2 shots instead of 3. It was the second decision that defied logic. The ball drifted right again, struck the railing of a grandstand, and ricocheted 50 yards backward into thick, knee-deep rough. From there, his 3rd shot caught the rough on the downswing. The club twisted in his hands, and the ball dropped straight into the berry burn. What followed became one of the most surreal images in golf history. Van de Velde removed his shoes, peeled off his socks, and rolled his trousers up above his knees. He stepped into the shin-deep water, seriously considering playing the ball as it lay, submerged beneath the surface. Alice, watching alongside millions of viewers, could barely contain his disbelief. This is so sad, and so unnecessary. Will somebody kindly go and stop this? Eventually, Van de Velde stepped back onto dry land. He accepted a penalty stroke and dropped the ball in the rough. His 5th shot found the greenside bunker, another obstacle standing between him and the trophy that had once seemed impossible to lose. From the sand, he blasted his 6th shot to within 6 feet of the hole. 1 score remained between him and a place in the playoff. Broadcaster Mike Tirico, describing the moment to viewers, said, "You root against no one, you root for no one, but you've got to hope that this goes in." The ball rolled toward the hole and fell in. Triple bogey 7. Enough to tie Paul Lawrie and Justin Leonard at 6 over par, forcing a 4-hole playoff. Van de Velde had needed only a double bogey to win outright. Instead, he had turned a coronation into a survival. Years later, reflecting on exactly where things went wrong, he offered a rare moment of clarity. "The real mistake is on the 3rd shot. I tried to go forward. The only thing you need to avoid is putting it in the water." It is a telling admission. Even in hindsight, he never fully condemned the driver or the ambition that defined his week at Carnoustie. His only regret was the execution of one single shot, the moment the ball met the burn. What had unfolded across that one hole was not simply a bad round of golf. It was a complete unraveling, shot by shot, decision by decision, in front of a global audience that could not look away. The 4-hole playoff offered little redemption. Still reeling from what had just happened, Van de Velde could not recover his composure. Both Lawrie and Leonard outplayed him over the closing stretch, and it was Paul Lawrie who walked away with the claret jug. Lawrie's achievement deserves its own recognition. He had trailed by 10 shots entering the final round, the largest final round comeback in the history of major championship golf. Yet his victory would forever live in the shadow of what had happened on the 18th hole just before it. History remembers the collapse far more vividly than it remembers the champion who capitalized on it. The press conference that followed was heavy with silence. What do you say to a man who had just let go of the achievement of a lifetime in front of the entire golf world? Van de Velde broke the tension himself, delivering a line that would become almost as famous as the collapse itself. "I made plenty of friends because a Scottish man won." To understand why this moment resonates so deeply, it helps to compare it with golf's other iconic collapses. Greg Norman's unraveling at Augusta in 1996 unfolded gradually, stroke by stroke, across an entire final round. Phil Mickelson's meltdown at the US Open in 2006 came down to a single hole, much like Van de Velde's, but Mickelson needed only a par to win, leaving him almost no room for error. Van de Velde, by contrast, had 3 full shots to work with. He did not need a great shot. He needed to avoid a disaster, and somehow found one anyway. That single detail is what separates his collapse from every other in golf history, and why it remains the standard against which all others are measured. One sports columnist for the Palm Beach Post captured the strange shift in public perception that followed. He wrote that he had found a new hero in Van de Velde, arguing that had he played the final hole safely and won with an ordinary double bogey, the moment would have been forgotten within days. Instead, because of what unfolded, Van de Velde became more famous in defeat than Laurie ever became in victory. A strange, unintended consequence of one catastrophic hole. Behind the humor he showed to reporters, the loss cut far deeper. That evening, Van de Velde confided in his wife at the time, Brigitte, saying, "I had my dream. Why was I so stupid?" It was a private admission that revealed how much the public composure had cost him. Strangers reacted in stranger ways. One letter arrived from England addressed only to Jean Van de Velde, southwest France. Inside was a photograph of him standing in the burn, with an arrow drawn toward it and the words, "That's him." He told the story afterward with the same self-deprecating humor that had defined his press conference. Something unexpected happened back home. At his local club, a weekly golf clinic for school children had typically drawn between 15 and 20 kids. 2 months after Carnoustie, 120 children showed up. As Van de Velde explained it, they went from 15 to 120 because they all wanted to play golf because of what happened to me. The years that followed were difficult. A skiing injury to his knee in 2003 required surgery and pushed him down to the second-tier Challenge Tour. In 2005, fate seemed to repeat itself. At the Open de France, he once again found water on the closing hole, this time losing a playoff to fellow Frenchman Jean-François Remesi. Redemption came the following year. At the Madeira Islands Open in 2006, Van de Velde captured his second European Tour title, 13 years after his first. Remarkably, he made another double bogey on the very last hole, but this time his overall lead held and he won by a single shot. It was, in its own way, a quiet correction to the story Carnoustie had written. His personal life moved forward as well. He married Brigitte in 1990, had 2 daughters, divorced in 2009, and later remarried, eventually settling in Mexico. In 2012, he was named an ambassador for UNICEF France, only the second French athlete ever given that honor. In 2024, Jean Van de Velde returned to Carnoustie. 25 years had passed since that afternoon on the 18th hole. Now 58 years old, he was there to compete in the Senior Open Championship, walking the same fairways, standing near the same burn that had swallowed his chances a quarter century earlier. Reporters asked him once again about that day. His answer carried none of the weight people expected. "It's never haunted me," he said, "and it's not about to start." He admitted he had been highly disappointed at the time. There was no pretending otherwise. But he had made peace with it long before, once saying plainly, "Golf is a large part of me, but it doesn't make me who I am as a human being." There he stood, older now, grayer, looking out at the same stretch of water he had once waded into barefoot in front of the entire golf world. He was not there to rewrite what happened. He was not chasing the trophy that had slipped away decades earlier. He was simply there, present, unafraid to stand in the